Hello, this is Shmuel Moshe, and you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast Season 2, the show where I read the Tanakh and provide my own interpretations of what I think it all means. This week's episode falls on the 3rd of Shevat, 5785, February 1st, 2025. It is the Torah reading for Parashat Bo, and we will be continuing with our reading of Shoftim, the Book of Judges, starting with chapter 16, picking up right where we left off with Samson. You could follow along in English on Chabad.org. As always, I remind everybody I'm not a professional Torah scholar, just somebody who wanted to study the Torah. And now the books that follow. Let's begin. Chapter 16, verse 1. And Samson went to Gaza, and saw there a harlot, and came to her. To the Gazites it was told, saying, Samson has come here. And they compassed and lied in wait for him all night by the gate of the city. And they were quiet the whole night, saying, Until the morning light, and we will kill him. Immediately now tell me with what you may be tied up. And he said to her, If I will be tied up with new ropes with which no work has been done, then I shall become weak and be as any man. And Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and said to him, The Philistines have come upon you, Samson. And the ambushers were staying in the room, and he tore them from his arms like a thread. And Delilah said to Samson, Until now you have mocked me, and told me lies. Tell me with what you may be tied up. And he said to her, If you weave the 7 locks of my head to the roller. And she fastened it with the peg, and said to him, The Philistines have come upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep, and he plucked away the peg of the web and the roller. And she said to him, How can you say, I love you, while your heart is not with me? These 3 times you have mocked me, and you have not told me wherein your strength is so great. And it was as she nagged him with her words every day and pressed him, that his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart, and said to her, A razor has not come upon my head, for I am a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I will be shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any man. And Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, and she sent and called to the lords of the Philistines, saying, Come up this time, for he has told me all his heart. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her, and brought the money in their hands. And she put him to sleep upon her knees, and she called to the man, and she shaved off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength left him. And she said, The Philistines have come upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep, and said, I will go out as at other times, and I will shake myself. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. And the Philistines seized him, and gouged out his eyes. And they brought him down to Gaza, and bound him with copper chains, and he did grind in the prison house. And the hair of his head began to grow after he was shaven. And the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, Our God has delivered our enemy Samson into our hands. And the people saw him and praised their God, because they said, Our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our land, and who has slain many of us. And it was when their hearts were merry, that they said, Call for Samson, and he will make sport for us. And they called for Samson out of the prison house. And he made sport before them, and they stood him between the pillars. And Samson said to the lad that held him by his hand, Allow me, and let me feel the pillars whereupon the house rests, that I may lean upon them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And upon the roof there were about 3,000 men and women, the spectators of Samson's sport. And Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, and strengthen me now, only this once, O God, that I may be avenged the vengeance for one of my 2 eyes from the Philistines. And Samson grasped the 2 pillars of the center, upon which the house rested, and leaned upon them, the one with his right hand, and the other with his left. And Samson said, Let my soul die with the Philistines. And he bent with his might, and the house fell upon the lords, and upon all the people that were therein. And the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his lifetime. And his brothers and all his father's household came down and carried him, and brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the burying place of Manoah his father. And he judged Israel 20 years. All right, so that's the end of the chapter 16 summary, or the reading, rather. Now for the summary. So Samson, we continue off of last time. So he's already got a penchant for fooling around with women he should not. And this time around, it starts off with him now cavorting with a harlot. So he has gone into Gaza, and he goes to the harlot, and the Gazites are aware of this, and they say, let's ambush this guy. We know he's there, so let's wait for him. And so what he does, Samson wakes up at midnight, and I suppose because he just somehow knows this, I have to assume that he was given this information by a dream, a prophetic dream by God, or some sort of intuition God related. Again, he was a person who had the Spirit of God upon him. So he wakes up, and what does he do? He takes the entire city gate, lifts it up, and basically holds it in place and carries it all the way up the top of the mountain. So why does he do this? Well, there are a couple things. First off, he is guarding his exit by literally moving the exit with him. If the people there are waiting to see the doors open to the city gate, what do they do when the city gate never opens but just starts moving toward them? And it's a terrifying sight, I'm sure. When you see something like that, I would imagine you just don't attack the person doing it. And so the Philistines do not end up, they don't follow through. He gets away. Now, it says here afterwards, he loved a woman by the brook of Sorek named Delilah. So these Philistines are pretty desperate to get to this guy, so they go to the woman and they basically say, we will pay you large sums of money, 1,100 silver pieces, if you will tell us how we can tie this guy up so we can torture him. And so that just becomes her job. She's like, okay, that's a pretty good payday. Yeah, sold. So 3 times she asks him, and every time he makes up some nonsense excuse or trick. Oh yeah, if you tie my hair to this thing, or if you wrap me up with these strings, and it's always a lie. And so he just tells her. Now, this is something that happened previously with Samson, but a woman basically just bothers and badgers him until he says or what she wants to hear. This happens to Samson twice in his life, and both times are to great detriment to everybody. But nevertheless, so she gets the truth out of him that he is a Nazirite, and so his power comes from his hair. Now, what I find interesting about that is that I guess it's strange to say that he's so loose and, fooling around with women constantly, because he's supposed to be a Nazirite and he's judging Israel. But it doesn't say that he wasn't allowed to fornicate. That's something he's just sort of doing. But the rules that he was given, or his mother was given, have more to do with not shaving his head and, alcohol and things like that. So I guess this is a freedom to fool around elsewise, but whatever the case may be, he's certainly not a role model, but because of the vow made to him through the Nazirite vow that his mother made on his behalf, according to the Lord's will, he has this superhuman strength. So every time they're going to ambush him, it's unsuccessful because he wakes up and he can clearly discover that that he lied, or she can tell he lied because he just immediately undid the thing that she was told would stop him. Well, eventually, by badgering him, she gets the truth and she has his head shaved, and then he gets attacked and swarmed. And he doesn't even realize that God is not on his side anymore. He gets up thinking he's going to go knock some heads as always, only to be captured. As soon as they capture him, they gouge out his eyes. And this is very interesting to me. We'll talk more about the eye gouging in a bit, but first, we're going to slide down. So we're going to take a look at, first off, the 1,100 silver pieces were paid to her. She got her money. He then becomes a spectator piece because the Philistines are thrilled. The terrorist that they've been dealing with has finally been stopped, and they turn him into a spectacle. They're throwing a huge party. Everybody's invited, and they're going to use Samson as like the main event. They're going to make him the little dancing monkey for everybody. So they have him demonstrate some things, and they laugh and have a great time. And then as he is being navigated around, remember he's blind, he says, hey kid who's moving me around, can you please put my hands on the pillar of the building that hold it up so that I can lean on it for a bit? And the kid does so. And once he's there, he makes a final call out to God, and he says, remember me and strengthen me now, only this once, O God, that I may be avenged the vengeance for one of my 2 eyes from the Philistines. So this is a very interesting statement. Why does he specify only one of his 2 eyes? I'm not sure entirely, but I'm going to make I'm going to make like a general assumption. One is because he himself deprived someone of an eye in some way, right? So maybe that's him saying, one of my eyes I deserve to lose, but not both of them. And maybe that's the case. But could it be something else? Could it be that he's saying that even just one of his eyes is enough to cover the cost of this revenge for all of the lives that he's about to take? Because once he does get his strength, and it notes that his hair had begun to grow back, so with his hair coming back, that means he has his power again, because as we know from the Torah, if you take a Nazirite vow, you shave your head before you start, right? So then you don't let a razor touch your head. But you can restart by shaving your head and going back to day one. And so in this case, Samson's head was shaven, but it didn't stay shaven. So his Nazirite vow was renewed. And using the strength that God gave to him, he killed more Philistines in a single day, in one moment, than he killed in his entire lifetime of fighting the Philistines. So another possible reason he only asked for vengeance for one eye. This man was a judge of Israel. He was significant. So he only cashed in one eye worth. He's basically saying, my one eye is worth all of these people. And if that is the case, then that means that there is a hanging debt. The Philistines have not been eradicated. Well, they still owe us the other eye, don't they? Maybe that's the whole point, is he's basically charging them one eye's worth, which is worth all their lives. So if he did two eyes, it would be too great of a vengeance. So instead he says, just let me do one eye. Now, another thing is they are doing all this before their idol of Dagon. They're celebrating Dagon, their god. And so, this is another thing, is like this moment is kind of a God versus God epic, where one single enslaved, blinded Samson on behalf of the God of Israel crushes all of the worshippers of the god Dagon. So this is a very important moment for that reason as well. And after the Philistines die, he is recovered, his body is recovered by his brothers and his father's household, and he's buried with his father, basically, his father's burying place. It says he was a judge for 20 years. Well, based on his lifestyle choices, I don't think he was the most exemplary judge of the Israelites. Moving on to number 17, chapter 17, verse number 1. Now there was a man from the mountain of Ephraim, and his name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, and about which you did curse, and you also spoke in my ears, behold, the silver is with me. I took it. And his mother said, Blessed be my son to the Lord. And he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, I have dedicated the silver before the Lord from my hand for my son to make a graven image and a molten one, and now I will restore it to you. And he restored the money to his mother. And his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave them to the founder, and he made thereof a graven image and a molten one, and it was in the house of Micah. Now the man Micah had a house of idolatry, and he made an ephod and teraphim, and initiated one of his sons who became his priest. In those days there was no king in Israel, every man did what was right in his eyes. And there was a lad from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, and he was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man went out of the city, out of Bethlehem in Judah, to sojourn where he could find a place. And he came to the mountain of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, while continuing to make his way. And Micah said to him, From where do you come? And he said to him, I am a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I go to sojourn where I may find a place. And Micah said to him, Dwell with me, and be to me an instructor and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver for the period, and a wardrobe of clothing with your provisions. And the Levite followed. And the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the lad was to him as one of his sons. And Micah initiated the Levite, and the lad became his priest, and was in the house of Micah. And Micah said, Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, because I had a Levite as my priest. All right, and there we have a very short chapter. So, as we heard, we have a man named Micah. So, Micah, or Micah, right? And we hear the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you did curse, and you spoke it. So, I note here the 1,100 pieces. That sounds awfully familiar. That's how much was offered per each person who was after Samson. So, the money that his mother lost was assumedly taken by the Philistines, basically commandeered by the tyrants in power. They took her money to pay for Samson, and she was very upset about it. She cursed about it, and her son heard, and so he basically says, "Hey, Mom, remember that thing you were complaining about? I took care of it. Here's your money back." And the woman is so taken aback in joy with this that she says, "Oh, my son is so wonderful, so wonderful. Let me dedicate the silver before the Lord from my hand for my son to make a graven image and a molten one, and now I'll restore it to you." So he gives her the money, and she takes 200 pieces of the silver, gives them to the founder, it says. I don't know who the founder is. Maybe it's the head of their group here, or it's the one who makes these sort of idols. But anyway, she gives the money, and it's used to make 2 idols. So this dude is casually rocking idols in his home, and it says that in these days, that's pretty much how it was. People just did whatever they thought felt right because there was no king to tell them what to do. And so there's a lad from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah. He was a Levite. So he's looking for a place to live, and he comes across on the mountain of Ephraim the house of Micah. And Micah says, "Hey man, where are you from?" And after a rough conversation, he basically says, "Hey man, I'll give you a job and let you stay here if you become one of my priests. I'll initiate you." And he raises this guy up, and he treats him like one of his own kids. He treats him like a son. And he says, now I know the Lord will be good to me because I had a Levite as my priest, right? So as far as he thinks, he's doing good. He's doing well, right? Because he took in a Levite. So this really shows how far the people have fallen from what they were instructed by Moses and Joshua. It is so far off left field, just totally out of crazy. How do they not get this? Like, how come we have a better understanding of the idol thing than they did? It was so clearly not allowed, yet here we are. So here's a very dangerous thing. He has taken a Levite, and the Levite is basically, who's supposed to be serving the house of God, is doing all this corrupt stuff. And so this is definitely not a good recipe, and we'll see some more here in a little bit. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on to chapter 18 and read to the end for this week's episode. Chapter 18, verse 1, Shoftim. In those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites sought for themselves an inheritance in which to dwell. For until that day there had not fallen to them among the tribes of Israel an inheritance. And the children of Dan sent from their families 5 men, part of them being men of valor from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said to them, "Go and search the land." And they came to the mountain of Ephraim up to Micah's house and lodged there. When they were by the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the lad the Levite, and they turned aside there and said to him, "Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? And what profit have you here?" And he said to them, "Such and such has Micah done for me, and he has hired me, and I have become his priest." And they said to him, "Ask now of God, that we may know whether we shall be prosperous on our way upon which we are going." And the priest said to them, "Go in peace, before the Lord is revealed the way which you will go." And the 5 men went and arrived in Laish, and they saw the people that were therein dwelling in security after the manner of the Zidonians, tranquil and secure, for there was none in the land to put them to shame for anything, their heirs being few, and they were far from the Zidonians, and had no bond with any man. And they came to their brothers, to Zorah and Eshtaol, and their brothers said to them, "What do you have to respond?" And they said, "Arise, and let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And you are silent. Do not be lazy to go and enter to possess the land. When you arrive, you will come to a secure people, and the land is sufficiently large, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is nothing lacking of anything which is in the land." And there journeyed from there, of the Danite family, out of Zorah and Eshtaol, 600 men girded with weapons. And they went up and encamped near Kiriath Yarim in Judah. Therefore they called that place the camp of Dan until this day. Behold, it is behind Kiriath Yarim. And they passed from there to the mountain of Ephraim, and came up to Micah's house. And the 5 men that went to spy out the area of Laish spoke up, and said to their brothers, "Do you know that in these houses there is an ephod, teraphim, a graven image, and a molten one? And now know what you have to do?" And they turned there, and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, in Micah's house, and greeted him. Now the 600 men of the children of Dan, girded with their weapons, stood by the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men that went to spy out the land went up. And they came in, and took the graven image, the ephod, the teraphim, and the molten image. And the priest stood by the entrance of the gate with 600 men that were girded with weapons. And these came into Micah's house and took the graven image with the ephod, the teraphim, and the molten image. And the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" And they said to him, "Be still, put your hand over your mouth, and go with us, and be to us an instructor and a priest. It is better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or to be a priest to a tribe and family in Israel." And the priest was pleased, and he took the ephod, the teraphim, and the graven image, and he came in the midst of the people. And they turned and departed, and put the little ones, the cattle, and the goods before them. They were at a distance from the house of Micah, when the men that were in the houses which were near Micah's house were gathered, and they overtook the children of Dan. And they called to the children of Dan, and they turned their faces, and they said to Micah, "What is with you that you are gathered?" And he said, "My God, which I made, you took away, in addition to the priest, and you have gone away. What else have I? How then can you say to me, what is with you?" And the children of Dan said to him, "Let not your voice be heard among us, lest men of embittered souls assail you, and you will lose your life and the lives of your household." And the children of Dan went their way, and Micah saw that they were stronger than he, and he turned and went back into his house. And they took that which Micah had made, and the priest whom he had, and they came to Laish, to a people tranquil and secure, and they struck them with the edge of the sword, and the city they burnt with fire. And there was no one to save them, because it was far from Zidon, and they had no bond with any man. And it was in the valley that lies by Beth Rehob, and they built the city and dwelt therein. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born to Israel, but actually Laish was the name of the city at first. And the children of Dan set up for themselves the graven image, and Jonathan the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, both he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Danites until the day of the exile of the land. And they accepted for themselves the graven image of Micah, which he had made throughout the period that the house of God was in Shiloh. Let's review. The people from the tribe of Dan, it says, they sought for themselves an inheritance in which to dwell, because until then they did not have one, right? So it seems that even though the land had been divvied up, not for the tribe of Dan, they didn't have anything yet. So they're sending these men of valor out, and they're spying in search of some land. So we actually don't know when exactly this takes place. We don't have the chronology, right? So this is just during the time period when the Danites are looking for their proper spot in life. So what ends up happening is they're by the house of Micah, and they recognize the voice of the Levite, right? So they've heard him before. They go, "Wait a minute, we know you. Hey, what are you doing here?" And he answers them. He says, "Well, the guy Micah, whose house I'm in, he's done all these things for me, and he's hired me, so I'm his priest." And they ask him, "Okay, well, listen, Mr. Priest, can you be a soothsayer for us and talk to God so that we can find out whether we're going in a good direction and we're going to be successful?" And in essence, he tells him, "Go in peace before the Lord is revealed the way in which you shall go." And so they go, they arrive in Laish, they see the people that are there dwelling in security, much like the Zidonians do, right? So they're nice, they're peaceful, and they're secure. And there's nobody, because they have no natural predators, essentially. They don't have a lot of nearby enemies. They're just kind of isolated, they're on their own. And it says, there was none in the land to put them to shame for anything, their heirs being few, and they were far from the Zidonians, and had no bond with any man. So they really were just an isolationist group. In other words, they're perfect for the picking for these essentially bandits. What else could you call them, right? The way that these Danites behave is basically just banditry under, religious doctrine. So nevertheless, they say, "Yeah, I think this land is going to do just fine." So they go back and they discuss it with their people, and 600 of them go with weapons, and they're going to take out this group of people and take their land. And so they are asking, what have you learned, right? When they come to their brothers, they say, "What did you see?" And they tell them, "We've got ourselves a victory on our hands. We've seen it. It's good. And don't be lazy. It's time. We're going to take that land. It's going to be just what we need. Let's go get it." And so they do so. They journey from their household, and they go from Zorah and Eshtaol, 600 strong. They camp in Kiryat Yarim in Judah, and so they call it the Camp of Dan, right, within Judah. And then from there, they pass the mountain of Ephraim and come to Micah's house. Now, the ones who were spying, they point out to the team, and they say, over in that house, they've got an ephod, teraphim, an image graven and molten. Now that I've told you this, you know what to do. And they go and they raid the house, right? So they go there and they talk to the Levite and they say, they've got their weapons, and the 5 guys who were there previously, they take the guy's idols, so they steal his stuff. And at first you'd think, you know what you got to do. It should be, you got to destroy that. But no, they take them for themselves, right? Because they're just as bad. And then as they take the stuff, the priest is like, what are you doing? Why are you robbing us? And he says, relax, be quiet, and come with us. And you can be our priest, our teacher, right? Is it better for you to be a priest to just the house of Micah or to an entire tribe and family in Israel? And so this is like, you know what? Yeah, you're right. And so this Levite basically leaves with the tribe of Dan. He goes with them. And then after they're getting away, Micah comes back and they all gather and they chase after them and they catch up to him. And they go, hey, what's going on here? And then the Danites look back at Micah and he goes, what do you want? Right? Like, it's so weird. They say, what is with you that you are gathered? So it's like such a strange thing to ask. And he responds with the appropriate answer. My God, which I made, you took away in addition to the priest, and you have gone away. What else have I? How then can you say to me, what is with you? In other words, are you seriously asking me what my problem is when you just took everything of value from my household? Are you kidding me? And so how can you tell me what's with you? And he says, how about this? Or I say he, but the children of Dan respond, okay, how about this? Why don't you keep your voice down, okay, and let not our people hear you, lest we kill you, right? In other words, why don't you just keep your mouth shut so nobody gets hurt, okay? So that way you and all your household don't get killed. And with that, Micah basically, he backs down because he realizes they are stronger than him. And so from there, they took that which Micah had made and the priest, all right? Then they come to Laish, and then, that people who are just chilling there in that village or their settlement, and they kill them and steal, or rather they burn the city to take the land. And now, because they were so far on their own, nobody was there to save them, and they had no friends and no allies. So from there, the city of Dan is officially founded. But keep in mind, it was originally the city of Laish or Laish. After that, they set up the idol, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, both he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the exile of the land. And they accepted for themselves the graven image of Micah, which he had made throughout the period that the house of God was in Shiloh. So this is a very interesting, very, very interesting thing, because we basically have clear explanations and confirmations of why these tribes have a problem. So this gives us some context on the background of the tribe of Dan, who we haven't heard a whole lot about in other sequences, and I think we've kind of picked up the pieces here that things are out of order in the book of Judges quite consistently. And so we can't know for sure when exactly this chronology takes place, other than if we know extra context about like when the city of Laish was besieged and taken. So that's pretty much all we have, but we know that the tribe of Dan itself not only settled, but did so while taking an idol and setting it up for themselves, and taking what was essentially a super corrupt priest. The Levite in question, Micah was doing stuff wrong, but it's really shady that this Levite would take, I guess it's like he decided to go with them for whatever reason. It does say that their words pleased him, and so he went with them. But, didn't Micah treat this guy like his own son? What a scummy guy. What a scummy priest. And it just shows how just corrupt the Israelites really were during this time period. There are no good guys in this story. Micah's trying his best, so I at least can commend him. He doesn't understand, I guess, the rules, because as far as he thinks, oh, I had a Levite working with me, or so God's really going to bless me. Obviously, that is not on the surface what happens here, because he got robbed blind and lost the priest that he had conscripted. But at the same time, I also want to say that maybe losing the graven image, what did he do? He honored his mother. He got her money back, and his mother is the one who made the idols, not him. So in a sense, it's not really his fault. So Micah is really not a bad guy. If anything, he seems like a great guy who's just a little misguided. And now that the idols and stuff are no longer his, I almost feel like he is spared greater consequences, though I suppose we'll find out next time. That is it for this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found it educational. I definitely find the book of Judges to be super convoluted or difficult to follow compared to the Torah, which is very straightforward in my opinion. These books of the Shoftim are just so all over the place, and there's no consistent chronology to them. It makes me wonder why the canon is the way it is. Like, why are these judges and people written about in this fashion? It's just too all over the place. But in any case, this has been Shmuel Moshe with the Weekly Parashahcast, Season 2. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll tune in next time. Until then, as always, Baruch Hashem.